What I want to do is I want to talk about two things. I'll talk about principles briefly, and then I want to talk about some new initiatives we've got, talking about new funders we want to come in and support RDA. Let me start with a quick anecdote. In fact, I don't know how many people know this, but in the U.S. a number of years ago we had a game show called I Can Name That Tune in 5 Notes, and you'd bet who can know it in the fewest notes. Well, in that light, we were trying to talk about principles. Can we put together a set of principles that are high level that begin to talk about what we're trying to do? As I kid folks, something that your grandmother would understand. And that's sort of the level of we were talking about. For those of you who've been involved in pitching ideas, it's also called an elevator speech. Can you indeed say it in a few words? People say, I see what you're about. So we had a meeting, as Carlos said, last week, was it? Like 2 weeks ago? Yeah. In Abingdon, it came with the idea of saying, can we come up with principles? We came up with 5, and so I want to just highlight them for you. What are the 5 principles? Discoverable, accessible, understandable, manageable, people. We're saying those are the 5 things that we're about. And let me just talk about each briefly. Discoverable, you must be able to find the information by conventional search engines. And I won't go through a lot more detail on this, but because it's sort of counterintuitive, if I spend 20 minutes telling you about principles, I've defeated the goal here. But the point is, can it be easily searchable and found? Is there adequate information to find it? All the metadata activities. And we have to use approaches that improve, indeed, how we discover stuff. So discoverable, can you find it? Is it there? Second one, is it accessible? And of course, this is the whole point of open access. Public available research being available for people and people to get used to and take advantage of. There's ethical standards we have to be aware of. There's normal practice we have to abide by. And indeed, users are going to have to sign some sort of terms of agreement for various types of data. So, discoverable, accessible. Third one is understandable. And this, of course, is where you get the issues of how do you understand the data, whether it's algorithms and tools, all types of data, video, numbers, and so forth. Can you... You're going to have to look at provenance issues and integrity issues. Translation is also an issue here. So again, is it understandable? What's in there to look at? Fourth one is manageable. You can have all those other things, but if it's not managed in some sort of sense, we've got an issue. So there has to be data management plans in place for it. You have to understand what's available for people to take advantage of. Costs and issues of dealing with storage, curation have all dealt with and have to be in place. Coordination has to be there. So you got manageable. And of course, the fifth one then is people. Because without people, we're not going to do much of this, so we need to look at new cadres of skilled data workforce folks. If you saw Farnham's comment this morning from the McKinsey report in the U.S., 140,000, 190,000 data managers are required, a couple of million new data technicians. I mean, where do we get those folks? How do we do that? We need highly skilled folks in these areas, new training programs, new culture of research, broad education. So that's the fifth one. And we also want to throw in metrics, because at the end of the day, you have to begin to look at metrics. What's the return on investment for these activities? What is the hard evaluation? How's it being used? What are the real goals? You have to have that as along with that. We listed new incentives and so forth. So those are the 5 principles. Let's go back up here. So discoverability, accessibility, understandable, manageable, and people. So we're asking you to think about that. Is that a model that we can use for RDA? We've talked to the G805 group. This is a draft we put together. We'd appreciate any comments you have on this. We're moving forward with that. So that's the principles part. Let me switch to the next topic. Just to let you know that we haven't stood still either. You guys have been busy, so have we. We're talking about what does it take to join RDA from the funder's perspective. And so we've got some ideas I want to run by you about what we're looking at for the Research Data Alliance Colloquium. For those of you who have been involved with us before, we used to call it the IDOF, as Carlos mentioned, the initial group of funders. Now we're saying as we grow up, let's look at creating a group that talks about Research Data Alliance Colloquium. This is the funders of support for RDA. So what is it? It's the group of science funding organizations that are going to provide support to do the sorts of things we need to see done for RDA. Providing us the support for whether it's working groups involving in RDA activities. The point is we played a role initially to start it. We're now saying as we move on now, how do we move beyond Australia, the US, and Europe? We've got a number of other countries that have indicated interest in joining us. And so we want to say, what is it going to do? And so this is the group we're looking at. We're going to meet as a group to discuss a range of issues, focuses on sharing research program plans and data. And we're going to co-locate our meetings along with this. We may have other meetings as appropriate, but again, we'll have a place for the funders to get together to hear what's going on and be involved with RDA as it expands. Why do we want to support it? Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's obvious. Data is sort of the lifeblood of science. You saw the comment earlier. I like to talk about data being the currency for research and science. That's really what we're here about. How do we make that happen? It's got to be shared. We've got to have it open access. This is a group that can begin to address some of those issues, and we honestly think that becomes a way to change the way we change the culture and change the way we're doing things as a global community. So the relationship is going to be arm's length. The research, we don't want the research group funding agencies to manage or direct RDA activities. RDA has to be a separate community of researchers with their own goals and so forth. So we're not governing the activities. We're not reporting to anybody either, and nobody reports to us. We're really a separate group that's linked to that. It's at arm's length. We're going to be governed, if you will, by our own agency organization itself. And give you an idea, we expect to pay like anybody else when we come to these meetings. There's no special deals because we're the funders groups. We're again, a highly interested party in looking at how we can best address science needs. And of course, we will certainly provide updates on our activities as the group feels appropriate. So what are the requirements? We're looking at basically asking that it's open to any science organization, funding organization, that is interested in the sort of things we do. Will the group provide funding to develop national data infrastructure? That's important. Second component, are they going to provide funding to projects? So, for example, many of you here are here because the funding agencies have essentially paid for your travel indirectly through projects. How do we grow that on an international scale? So we want the funding agencies to say, yes, we think it's important enough that we want to include it in your projects and awards. It's something you can actually ask for. We talked about our initial commitment for 3 years. Again, the point is we're not interested in somebody coming in just to try it, but this is really a long-term effort. How do we look at this long-term? For more information on joining, again, this is a high level. I'd suggest Claire isn't here, but Sheila is, so she can take your words for you. But talk to Claire, Carlos, or myself, and we'll be glad to talk to you about getting other science agencies involved. Activities, again, meeting co-located with RDA, focusing on sharing policies and practices and approaches, tracking the relevant activities, because as you learn and do things, we may find ways to either support that or encourage it or say, hey, how about new directions in these areas for other researchers? We will coordinate with other groups because there are a lot of other groups, specifically the G805 group and others. Say, so we don't duplicate the effort here. We had discussions earlier today about redundancies. You don't want that, but you do want to find ways to coordinate activities. We'll select our own chair and co-chair, and we'll manage our own agenda. So that's sort of what we're planning from the funding side. And I think that's it. So, thank you.